Welcome to today's webinar on the Invasion Severity Index, Maps and Web App to Support Strategic Invasive Annual Grass Management. We're very excited to be able to share this prototype, we'll call it, of a tool that we've been thinking about for the last year since the release of some brand new higher resolution RAP data, rangeland analysis platform data. So we wanted to tap into that and apply it specifically to develop tools to help us make treatment level decisions and prescriptions when it comes to treating cheatgrass, medusa head, ventonata, and other invasive annual grasses, particularly in our sagebrush and grassland ecosystems of the West. Before I get into the specifics of the tool, I want to just give you a little bit of background on who Working Lands for Wildlife is and the team that's helped support this, because I know we've had just a ton of turnover in the last year. Western Working Lands for Wildlife is USDA's premier approach for conserving America's working lands to benefit people, wildlife, and rural communities. It isn't a farm bill program per se, but we do have dedicated funding through national initiatives and state-based initiatives that help support delivery. But at its core, it's really an approach, a thought process and a delivery mechanism for addressing large-scale threats that impact both people and wildlife. In the West, our efforts really center around two big biomes, the sagebrush biome and the Great Plains biome. And most of our efforts are centered around rangelands, shrublands and grasslands, primarily because 70% of the land base in this region is rangeland. So our Working Lands for Wildlife effort is an approach that's rooted in 6 elements of success that we've learned over the years help contribute to producing the kinds of outcomes that we'd all like to see. We lean into NRCS's longstanding trust and credibility. All of you in the field who live in our rural communities and have those trusted relationships with landowners, it starts there. Being able to have those conversations at a kitchen table about challenging problems that they face. Shared vision. We look for that common ground between agriculture and wildlife. We're not looking to just do things that benefit critters here. We like to say, if it's good for the bird, it's good for the herd. That's really what we're talking about in terms of finding that common shared vision. We have science partnerships that help us be very strategic and accountable for the types of actions we're taking. And you can sum that up in terms of like targeting tools and spatial planning that we're going to talk about today that helps us maximize our efficacy and our return on investment. And then we want to have some help from the science community to monitor the outcomes of that and help tell the story. We use partnerships to help leverage, our investments to go a lot further. And where needed, we work with our regulatory agency partners to provide that predictability to landowners so that they don't have to worry about being punished for doing something good. Most of you probably are aware of our longest standing efforts in the biome, particularly in the sagebrush country, and that is our Sage Grouse Initiative, started in 2010. We're now 16 years strong. And I would say that we have evolved from a bird to a biome. And that's come from our experience and the science telling us what is really driving ecosystem level changes that are undermining agriculture and wildlife in the region. And so our framework for conservation action that we published in 2021 really lays out our mindset and thinking and focuses our efforts around 4 major threats that we are working with producers to address, including annual grass invasion, woodland expansion, land use conversion, and that mesic or riparian and wet meadow degradation. Newer to our portfolio is the migratory big game efforts and initiative. This is really focused on protecting those long range migrations that our big game animals like pronghorn, mule deer, and elk make from low elevation to high elevation and back every single year, where private working lands are the glue that helps them make that transition and complete their life cycle. This effort is what started in Wyoming as a pilot, has expanded now to 5 states that are nationally funded. And we are currently working on a framework that will expand this to other states. But essentially, that includes a lot of the same threats we described before, plus some issues with making wildlife fence interactions less costly to migratory big game. Quick Hollywood squares of our team here. On the NRCS side, we've had quite a bit of change, but I still serve on our team west-wide and help provide leadership on our Western Working Lands for Wildlife efforts. But I'm joined by a ton of great partners, and these folks are supported through a cooperative agreement that our agency has with Pheasants Forever. So I won't go through all of these folks here today, but a lot of the great stuff that you're seeing come from Working Lands for Wildlife is just due to the exceptional folks that we have these partnerships with. Here's what we do. Our work revolves around trying to generate measurable outcomes for society. And to do that, we're leveraging the best science we can. We're enhancing our communications to help tell the story and garner more participation and put farmers and ranchers first and, as successes and heroes in that story. Technology transfer and training is huge to bring this information off the shelves of science and put it into the hands of your practitioners like you. And then, of course, tons of partnerships to help backfill capacity needs, leverage funding, and provide more technical assistance to producers. Okay, now with that background in place on who Working Lands for Wildlife is, let's get back to the topic of the day. Why an Invasion Severity Index? Well, if you look at the science on the state of the sagebrush biome, according to the Sagebrush Conservation Design, we are losing about 70% of our intact core sagebrush rangelands due to invasive annual grasses alone. It is the single largest threat to the future of our healthy Western rangelands. The map here shows in dark blue our most intact, least fragmented sagebrush grazing lands. The lighter blue is somewhat impacted growth opportunity areas, and the tan are more heavily fragmented and impacted areas. And so when we talk about this change, what I mean is going from dark blue to tan. So when we do that, we lose a lot of values that we care about, from forage to wildlife. And we haven't forgotten about wildlife. We've just made the connection to ecosystem management. And so goes sagebrush cores, so goes our wildlife. While the national narrative around sage grouse populations is that they've generally been declining, what we found when we look at this more closely is they are stable in our core sagebrush rangelands. And a lot of those declines that are happening across the biome are really in these other more fragmented sagebrush rangelands that are impacted by things like invasive annuals. Our big game are getting hit too. Mule deer in particular strongly avoid areas with more than 20% annual grass cover. And this was a study just published last year out of the University of Wyoming. So what do we do about this? Well, at the heart of our Western Working Lands for Wildlife approach and our strategic thinking is the old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We can map out on the landscape where our most intact areas are and set up a spatial plan, a game plan, so to speak, to proactively manage invasions and other threats in those areas before we move out to more heavily invaded and degraded landscapes. Because we know that once we get to those places, our restoration success is very low, it's very costly, and there's a lot of pressure working against us in those types of places. And so you've heard us talk about defend the core, grow the core, and this is really the mindset that we're trying to apply to many different threats. We've also partnered with some of the best in the business at the University of Wyoming and their Imagine group to develop a suite of principles for effective annual grass management. And at the heart of those principles is this proactive mindset and this idea that we aren't just managing against an invasive annual grass, we're managing for our desired perennial plants. And it's really about leveraging ecology and understanding the push and pull between these functional groups that's going to get us into a better place in the future. So this diagram represents our current mental model for management decision-making when it comes to invasive annuals. What we do for management largely depends on the balance of our good guys in terms of our desirable perennial grasses in particular to the bad guys, or our invasive annual grasses. So if you look at the axes here, areas with no to low invasive annual grasses, but high desirables and perennial grasses are places that we want to maintain. Our mindset there is to defend the core and keep it that way. On the other end of the spectrum, where we have high invasions and maybe lower amounts of our desired perennials, we need to shift our mindset to one of how can we contain that problem from impacting other places? How do we minimize fine fuels, whether that's through dormant grazing or targeted grazing? And even in some cases, we may want to do full-blown kind of restoration seeding to convert it back to a more desirable state. And we can put specific practices and management actions in this decision space here where, we might do things like monitoring and early detection, rapid response in the upper left, kind of that middle zone where we have some perennials and some annuals. We're talking about pre-emergent herbicides to release our perennial grasses. And then as things progress and get worse, again, we're talking about different types of tools like just managing fine fuels or seeding. So our goal with the Invasion Severity Index wasn't just to create another invasives map. Lord knows we have tons and tons of maps. We wanted to provide something useful for treatment planning and prescriptions. And we had you in mind. We had NRCS conservation planners in mind. And I'm thinking about being able to delineate treatment polygons that relate to specific practices and actions we're going to take. Because the data are available through time, we also can use this tool to monitor trends and see if they're working and determine whether or not we need to go back in and retreat. In some places, we've done enough herbicide treatment that we're kind of asking the question, are we done yet? And this type of tool might be helpful in answering that and setting some expectations for, maybe the level of invasion we can reasonably manage for. So to help put this tool into context of other tools, I want to borrow an analogy from my good friend Brian Mueller at UW to explain, again, just how you can think about this particular product in context of other tools. So those of you that golf will probably get this right away. You have a suite of clubs that are designed to do different things. And when you approach your fairway and you're ready to start going for the hole here, you're going to grab your driver as your big blunt instrument to get you as far down that field as possible. And it doesn't have a ton of accuracy, but it hits far. After that, you go to your irons to get a little bit more surgical as you approach that target. And then finally, your putter gives you that most precision in terms of actually being able to hit the bullseye. That's how I'd encourage you to think about this particular product in the context of all the other tools and products we have out there, from the broadest level, like our Sagebrush conservation design, or even some of the invasive management framework priority maps. Some of you may be familiar with the Oregon threat-based eco-state maps that are useful at more of a pasture and allotment scale. And then the product we're talking about here today is a little bit closer to that target. But of course, we still want to couple that with some boots on the ground to go just verify and see that things make sense. But we are trying to get close enough here where we can map the state of the land to such an extent that we can make a treatment prescription with a little bit of field verification. Just a tip of the hat again to our development team. Derek Tilley, Joe Smith, Kris Mueller, Scott Morford, Dave Noggle, all at the University of Montana and Working Lands for Wildlife supported. RAP, we have incredible partnership with the Agricultural Research Service and the Jornada Experiment Station in particular, who stewards RAP today. The product that we're leveraging is brand new. So you've probably been exposed to RAP 30-meter data, which has been available now for 6 or 7 years. Just last year, though, we've added to that portfolio 10-meter resolution data. And instead of using that Landsat satellite mission, we're using the Sentinel satellite mission to produce higher resolution maps with additional functional group indicators. So beyond just broad functional groups, we now have one that represents invasive annual grasses, which is the 10 most common invasive annual grasses in the West. There's a canopy gap layer, a sagebrush layer, and a pinyon juniper layer as well. That new 10-meter data, just to put this into your brain, is about the size of half of a tennis court. So a 10 by 10 meter pixel, you're going to get a percent cover estimate for that size area. In developing our Invasion Severity Index, we had a little bit of fun. There is no new idea in the era of AI, so we went and asked the question about, what kind of a model is out there that's similar to what we're trying to do. And turns out NOAA and its Winter Storm Severity Index has this similar type of approach, mapping out this gradient of expected impacts based on a certain set of conditions that are provided. So here's what's in the black box. What we did was we actually took the invasive annual grass functional group, 10-meter data, and we're essentially comparing that to the sum of our perennial forbs and grasses, or our good guys, our desired perennials, plus bare ground. Why bare ground? Well, bare ground is an underappreciated functional group when it comes to mitigating the impacts of invasive annual grasses. It's also a useful surrogate for the abiotic potential of a site. And we just found, as we were developing this over the last year, that if you want a product that makes sense from the Great Plains of, Northeast Wyoming to the deserts of Southern Nevada, you have to account for bare ground. So this index is a ratio of invasive annuals to perennials and bare ground. And when you plot that out, a sample of it, here's kind of what it looks like in terms of the percent cover buckets. And you can see we've picked standard breaks between these, and these are not magical levels or thresholds. They're just useful categories that help us apply this to management decisions, which is really where we want it to get. And this is where this tool becomes prescriptive in terms of what we do, or at least provides us with some indication of what we might do in those places. Here you'll see the levels range from very low to severe, and they range from invasive annual grasses being absent or relatively low relative to that perennial and bare ground component, to invasives being very high relative to our perennial and bare ground component. Again, on the left, limited impacts on our site function. On the right, extremely high impacts to our site function, greatly elevated fire risk. From a management standpoint, we've got not only our strategies varying from maintain, improve to revegetate or contain, but you can see in the finer print specific types of treatments that we're going to be likely doing in those different invasion levels, from kind of early detection, rapid response. Perhaps we're just spraying small patches of disturbed areas, spot spraying, right? To once we have more widespread invasions, but we still have some good perennials, we're talking about that pre-emergent herbicide application, maybe localized seeding as things get a little bit more on the bare ground end. But by the time we're in the 4 and 5 level of index, we're starting to think about, okay, more aggressive management is going to be needed here. And so simply applying a tool like Indaziflam might not be sufficient. We might actually have to do some seeding. And in that case, there's a different order of operations for restoration. So with that, we're going to transition this presentation over to Derek, who's going to explain a little bit about the background and then give you a demonstration of the web app. Derek, take it away.
All right, thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, so what we've got up on the screen right now is a couple shots from the user guide that we've written for you guys. It covers basically what Jeremy just talked about, a little bit of ecology, spatial prioritization and planning. And then it talks about the app itself and the math that goes into it. And then we've got a nice appendix that is kind of a step-by-step, user-friendly, what does this panel do? What does this button do? Kind of guide. Go ahead and click to the next one, Jeremy. Right, so one of the things that we run into, especially when we try to create a biome-wide tool, is certain things, work the way they're supposed to. A lot of it doesn't. There's certain little bits that you kind of have to apply your own thinking to. And so this is the BYOB, bring your own brain assumptions and limitations slide. So just be aware going into this that it is a model. It has a certain level of error just due to the fact that it's remotely sensed from satellite imagery. We do get down to the 10-meter pixel, but there's error within that. There's error, calculating the proper grass or functional groups. So just be aware of that. There's going to be some error. It's not species specific. We can't dial this into just Medusa head or just cheatgrass invasion. It lumps those, I think it's the 10 most prevalent Western invasive grasses together. So that's the IAG functional group. I think Jeremy just mentioned those breaks between groups. They're not meant to be, very specific thresholds where one bucket equals a certain prescription, right? It's a spectrum. It's a gradient. and the suggestions just kind of get you in the ballpark. But again, you do have to apply your own logic and reason on a site-by-site basis. And finally, just be aware that the overstory matters. And so if you're in a highly wooded area, the remote sensing tools aren't going to be able to accurately, tease out the grasses under there. Or if you're in the Great Plains, rhizomatous grass countryside of eastern Wyoming, you might not get an accurate depiction of the invasive annual grasses underneath. Likewise, if you're in a, cheatgrass monoculture in the Great Basin, it might be hiding sandbird bluegrass that you wouldn't be able to see from the satellite. You got to go in and do an on the ground kind of assessment to get this into that proper treatment box. So this gets you close, but you still got to do the work. Okay, Jeremy, is there another one or is it screen share? Oh, yeah, I know what's coming. So Jeremy mentioned the Imagine group, and we just want to put a plug in for their virtual workshop that's coming up on April 8th. This is going to be an excellent workshop with a lot of updates on the science and tools that can be applied to invasive annual grasses. So take note of that, invasivegrasses.com.
Yeah,
All
and
right.
Derek, I'll point out here that, for folks that want detailed information on, herbicide applications and treatment considerations, we have this whole other training program built out with Imagine, and I'd encourage you to go to invasivegrasses.com and participate in the ongoing events, but we also have some on-demand webinars and modules that you could watch if you're really looking for that kind of technical detail.
So I'm going to share my screen and I will be the tour guide and walk you through this. Hopefully you guys are seeing my screen here. This is what you get when you open the Invasion Severity Index, and I'll just drop that link in the chat for you. But the first thing you'll see when you open it is it does span the entire sagebrush biome and a little bit more. We originally had this covering basically all of the western states, but we weren't super confident on, what we knew about the San Joaquin Valley in California or the Southwest deserts. So we limited this to the sagebrush biome where we have more confidence, but we did extend a little bit eastward, parallel to the eastern edge of Colorado, because we know there's important cheatgrass and medusa head invasions happening over in the western portions of these plain states. So we wanted to capture that. Next thing you'll see, like I already moved it, we've got this 2-panel slider. So you can have a left panel and a right panel and put different layers in each one of those. So let's just dive in and check out some of the basic functions here. So I'm going to go to, let's see, a good representative of a dry Great Basin site. This is Tonopah, Nevada. And when you're in here, you can see the different layers of the index level description. So we've got very low all the way through severe. You can see this area is pretty good health. If you zoom in and click on a pixel, you'll get a point summary over here on the left, and it will give you, we'll expand that out a little bit, the ISI level. So here, very low, and it'll break out the percent cover of the different functional groups that you can get from RAP, the important ones anyways. Invasive annual grass here is just 1%. Perennial grasses and forbs is only 1% as well. But because of that math and because we included bare ground in the equation, this comes out accurately as a very low invasion status. Now maybe we can zoom in to something a little bit further along the invasion severity. So here you can see we've got 29% invasive annual grasses to 8% perennial forbs and grass and 13% bare ground. And here down below this, you get a time series graph. And this is just of these three components, invasives, perennial foreign grass, and bare ground. But this goes all the way back to 2018, which is where the WRAP 10-meter data begins. So that's a really dry, low productivity environment. Now we'll compare that to Sheridan, Wyoming, where there's better precip out there, better soils, and so you don't run into that bare ground as much. You got a lot of western wheatgrass covering the area. So if we click on one of these sites, here we've got 11% invasive annual grass, so quite a bit more, but 66% perennial foreign grass cover and very little bare ground, and that comes in at a low ISI. If we go into one of these tougher spots, say here, we've got 36% invasive annual grass, 34% perennial grass, and that gets equated with very low bare ground to a high level of invasion severity. So that's kind of the basics. We can't do a polygon kind of capture at this point. You can't import a polygon from your desktop or ArcGIS yet. We might be able to get that in the future, but right now it's just this point analysis and the time series for that point. Next thing we'll do is look at two panels at the same time. I'm going to go to Prairie City, Oregon for this one, where they've done some really cool indaziflam treatments. So I'm going to have on the left, I'm going to have the Invasion Severity Index, and then we're going to choose down here a year specifically. So what we recommend typically is to run this 23 to 25 year average that kind of smooths out the environmental variation from year to year. But you can do this year by year analysis or comparison. So I'm going to choose 2018 here, and I'm going to choose the Invasion Severity Index on this side and go to 2025. And thanks to the 10-meter WRAP data, we can really get good enough information that we can make comparisons post-treatment. So once this loads up, you see over here we've got really high invasive annual grasses, but if we slide over, you can see that the treatments have had quite a bit of effect. I'll zoom out a little bit because they did some really nice large-size treatments here. Sorry, it does take a moment to load. So if you look at these pastures here, 2018, they had super high invasive annual grass. By 2025, they're really nicely cleaned out. And you can see that, let's see, we'll do a point right here. You can see it started in 2018, very high, 80% invasive annual grass, and by 2025, it's almost nothing, and the perennials have responded nicely. So that's a year-by-year analysis within the ISI. We also have these really cool minimum and maximum slider tools. So I'm going to go to another site to play with that. We're going to go to Mountain Home, Idaho, which is kind of a rough spot in my neck of the woods. And so I'm going to go back to, let's see, 25-year average on both of these. And then on this first one, we're going to have everything set to 0 minimum, 100% maximum. But over here, I'm going to set the perennial forbs and grass minimum to about 20-25%, because a lot of times when we're talking about indaziflam treatments, we want to consider what's our perennial forb and grass component going in before treatment to decide if that indaziflam is the right tool or not, because you want a decent amount of perennials on the ground going in. So if you set this at 20 or 25, whatever your appropriate threshold is for your ecosystem or your environment, oops, I'll let that load up a little. This will mask out anything between 0 and 24% perennial forbin grass. So as we're sliding here, we can see there's a lot of country down here that doesn't meet that threshold. So anything that is masked out as we're going back and forth probably wouldn't be the place where you can just get away with an indaziflam treatment. This is where you're going to have to do some kind of weed control plus maybe seeding and more intense restoration. Right? Another thing we can do is we'll bring that back to 0, and I'm going to scroll way out, and then we're going to set the invasive annual grass to a max of, say, 1%. And now we're going to see how much of the biome is basically weed-free, at least in the eyes of the satellite imagery. Oop, let it load. So you can see how much of the biome has at least 1% invasive annual grass in it. There's just a few really good strongholds left in the biome. Southwest Wyoming. We've got very little out in the Great Basin, a little more in the central basin and range, and then a lot of country out here that has yet to be severely impacted. But I find that kind of sobering. Then real quick, in addition to the Invasion Severity Index, we've got a couple different reference layers for you. We've got the Boyd management framework you can click, and you can do this side by side if you wanted. We've got the threat-based ecostates. And we've got the SCD. And with each one of these, we have a transparency slider, so you can see the satellite imagery underneath it if you want, but you can go through, zoom in to your site and see where it relates to in the sagebrush conservation design. It does take a minute. Let's see. And then we've got land ownership layer and the satellite only layer. If you go over here, we've got a couple of hot links. This one will take you to the user guide, the PDF, and then this one here takes you to that table so that you always have this as a reference. I think at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Kris Mueller to talk about how to get this into the NRCS desktop. So I'm going to stop sharing. There we go.
Awesome. Thank you, Derek, for laying out what we can do in the app there. So I'm basically just briefly going to go over how you can bring these Invasion Severity Index layers into your own GIS, and specifically just ArcGIS Pro at the moment as prepackaged layer files, essentially. So on the ISI app here, you can just simply click on this Download ISI Layers link here. It'll bring you to a download hub, which is all of those layers packaged from 2018 up through 2025, including that average layer from 2023 to 2025. And you'll notice here, these are packaged as each state based on the extent that you see in that web app there, with states abbreviated by their abbreviations here. So you see ISI Arizona, California, Colorado. And I'd recommend folks to read this README file here before downloading, just to get a general sense of what those layers show. It's basically just a more succinct explanation from the user guide. And so if you download any of these state files, it'll download here as a ArcGIS Pro layer package file. You simply just double click this and it'll open for you in ArcGIS Pro to that average 2023 to 2025 layer. And so you'll see it comes pre-symbolized from that very low severity to the very high, going from that blue to red, that same color scheme that you see in the web app. And of course, it also has each of the individual layer years that you can turn on and off. And so it's going to have that same 10-meter resolution, pixel resolution here that you get in the app. But, of course, now it has the ability to, you can bring in your own spatial data sets, essentially in ArcGIS, and make any sort of spatial analysis that you need to do in your own GIS. Of course, if you click on any pixel, it'll give you that invasion severity level from 1 to 5. And so that's all I've got, and I'll hand it back to Jeremy.
All right, great. Thanks, you guys. That concludes our overview and demonstration.